So I've just got done completing High on Life, and this is going to be my full review. I want to put a disclaimer out there and say that there might be some spoilers throughout this review, but I'm going to try and keep them to a minimum. The main things I want to talk about in this game is the gameplay itself, the characters, like the story, obviously whilst keeping it to a minimum with the spoilers. And also just quickly before we carry on with this review, I want to thank everyone that's been supporting the channel recently. The channel is growing very nicely. A huge thank you to everyone that supports the channel using the links in the description. The merch purchases, the Buy Me a Coffee, the CD Keys affiliate link. All support on the channel is greatly appreciated. And I also want to welcome all the new subscribers on the channel. Now let's get into this review. I hope you guys enjoy it. And we're going to start off with how the game starts. You just start off living your normal day-to-day life, and then you find out that your planet has been invaded by aliens. What happens is you get taken to an alien planet, you've got to find a bounty hunter that is named Gene, and you've basically got to go through the whole game working your way towards getting your planet back. Throughout the whole of High on Life, there is essentially one faction. There's like a couple of sub-factions. The main one being G3 Cartel, that's the main faction of the game. Then the sub-factions, I would say, is the Torg enemies. They are, I think they're ants, so I'm not entirely sure what creature they are, what insect they are, or whatever. But they do work protecting the Torgs, and then later on in the game, they're also working for G3. So I would say that the ants and the Torgs are essentially a sub-faction of the G3 Cartel. Then I'm going to put them into their own little sub-faction, and you've got these little mites, these little insects that jump at your screen. They're frustrating, like they're really, really annoying little bugs, but they are other enemies in the game. So it's not just one enemy through and through. There are different archetypes within the faction and stuff as well, but there's not too much variety. So the enemies might put you off a little bit. It might be like a been there, done that sort of thing as you progress towards the middle and then eventually towards the end of the game. This game is going to feature 6 main bounties. The bounties are your main missions, or levels if you want to call them that. There are 6 in total, then it gives you basically what's a 7th, but that is the final boss fight. It's not initiated the same way the other 6 bounties are. And with these boss fights in the game, I think they did a really, really good job with them. The arenas are different. You are basically put into like an arena every single boss fight. But the arenas are different, the attack patterns are cool, the bosses themselves have like fun personalities and things like that. And this game does start off with a really strong sense of humour. There's a lot of comedy thrown in there, it's an absolute blast. But about an hour and a half, 2 hours into the game, when you're maybe around a third of the way through or something like that, it's going to start becoming repetitive, the comedy falls off incredibly quick, and it does start feeling a little bit more like repetitive, tedious as you get towards the middle of the game, because the comedy falls off so drastically. But then it does change towards the end of the game, and it goes, like basically if there was a slider for this game, the start of it, or like a journey path or whatever, the start of it is just, I would say, pure comedy, entertainment. It builds you up into the game, then it starts taking itself far too seriously, and then at the end there's a couple of little like sad parts in there. So it goes from being a light-hearted comedy game, and it eventually becomes a serious, more down-to-earth, like kind of sad story really. So it goes from light-hearted to serious. But I feel the pacing of that is actually quite good. I don't think they rushed into the serious side of it. I don't think they dragged out the comedy so it lasted far too long and that become boring itself. I feel they had a very good balance when it came to the progress of the game, the story, and how it was going to play out. There were a couple of annoying parts. Every time I finished a bounty, I was having to go home and settle an argument between my sister and the initial bounty hunter that you find. But then as you're taking down these bounties, you're making progress in the game, you eventually come to hear some news from Kenny. He's the initial gun. Like, you have 5 guns throughout this game, and every single one of them talks to you. They've got their own story, personality, and everything like that. They have their own abilities. The guns are fantastic. But you come to find that there is some really bad news from Kenny, who is your main starting gun. And that's when the serious side of the game really comes out, and there's a couple of sad moments and things like that. It gets a lot more intense as you get closer to the end of the game. Personally, I didn't really get on with the sister character. She was more frustrating, like constantly just thinking about herself in this game. Every now and then you would get a little text pop up in your suit and she would ask how you're doing and, oh my god, I can't believe you're going to save the world and that sort of stuff. But her character, her personality, I didn't really personally get on with it. I did really like Kenny, I liked the other guns as well. I liked Gene the bounty hunter, some of the bosses and the other characters you have interactions with throughout the game. They were all cool, but the sister, she wasn't all that in my personal opinion. Then the game also, towards the end, gives you a choice of just making straight up progress and continuing with the story, or when it comes to the sad part about Kenny, you have a choice to go and basically try and make things right. So I like that they added that in where it's not just like linear and straight from start to finish. You also have collectibles and things in the game, like you've got lug locks boxes. I did call them lug boxes in my Is It Worth It? But these lug locks boxes, they give you pesos, which is the currency in the game. You can then go and you can purchase abilities for your weapons, for your suit. You can get extra shield or extra health and things like that. The abilities, the weapons and their attacks, they are all fantastic. I absolutely loved all of it in the game. This is a very well put together game, and there is a lot of satire in this game. There's a lot of references to other games taking the piss and just having a laugh with it. They even put a disclaimer saying if you find bugs in the game, they're intentional, and there is a lot of like satirical talk throughout the game. In terms of bugs, and I mean like things that can break the game and things that are going to ruin your experience, I encountered one throughout my entire playthrough of this game, and that one just required that I restarted the game. So basically there was a boss fight I was doing, and there was a part of it that broke on me. I couldn't make any more progress, so I went to reload my last checkpoint because you do get checkpoints throughout the missions and stuff, and upon trying to restart it, my game actually crashed back to my Xbox dashboard because I've played on the Xbox Series X, so I had to restart the game, but it did manage to fix itself. But that was the only issue I come across throughout the entire game. There were a couple of parts that felt slow, but there weren't any bugs or anything with them. When I say slow, I mean like interactions, like the hitboxes for the prompts, they weren't as big as I felt they should have been, but that's just a minor inconvenience. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that because everything did work. As you're progressing towards the end of the game, where it gets really intense, there is a little bit of humour added in again, so it's as though they had a strong start with humour, it died down and went more serious, then at the end they mixed the two together, and that's how they formed their story. And I think they did a fantastic job with it. I really did enjoy the story for this game. It's probably not as perfect as some people would like it. Some people are going to get frustrated. A lot of players are going to find that this game's quite annoying with the way the dialogue and stuff works in it. But for people that enjoy things like Rick and Morty, because this game was created by one of the co-creators of Rick and Morty, for people that enjoy that sort of comedy, that sense of humour, you will definitely enjoy this title. So overall, in terms of playtime, the game lasted around 6 hours. I think it was a little bit under 6 hours for me. But because of the collectibles, there's different cards you can pick up, there's the abilities, there's the lug locks boxes, there's a few secret achievements and stuff you can pick up. Because of that, I can see it lasting 10 to 12 hours for completionists that want to go in there and do absolutely everything there is to do. There are multiple planets in this game, there's quite a bit of exploration. When you are outside of bounties, it's open world. When you're inside a bounty, it's very linear. You start here, you make your way to the boss, you fight the boss, that's the bounty done. But outside of the bounties, it's open world. You can explore as much as you want, and the planets are amazing. They are put together really well. There's puzzles in there all over the place, like certain areas you might not be able to access unless you've got something specific. If you want it, the option is there to explore the worlds and get a better understanding of everything within the game. One thing that was a little bit of a letdown for me towards the end of the game as well is just the, I'm going to say, basically lack of effort with the final boss fight. I don't want to ruin too much. The gun does actually talk to you and say, oh wow, look, this is lazy development. And the game really threw me off with it because they say any bugs you find in the game are intentional. So it's like, are you actually doing this on purpose? Or is this something you've missed out on in development? It makes you trip as though you are taking drugs, and this game has a big portion of it that is about drug use. So I think that was like ultimately their goal of making players trip and confusing players, and that's how they've created their engagement and getting people to actually enjoy this title because you get confused and you're like, well, is this supposed to be happening, or is this just something that's happened because of a lack of development, a lazy development? It gets you really thinking. But I do believe ultimately it was their goal to create this sort of emotion and feeling when you're playing the game, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. There were just a couple of times where I was like, okay, that was a tiny bit weird, but then you move to the next part and it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's a little bit weird how it worked, but that'll do. There wasn't anything in this game that's going to completely ruin your experience or anything like that. Besides, like, obviously I had the part where the boss fight bugged out and I had to restart the game, but that was literally it through about 6 hours of the game. But when it did come to the final boss fight, it wasn't that entertaining. The attack pattern is unique, it's very enjoyable, there's a lot more like dodging and like trying to avoid the attacks and stuff, but the boss fight itself, it was just like your typical 2-phase boss fight. And that's all I'm really going to say about it, because I don't want to spoil what happens. Obviously, I've just said there's 2 phases in the boss fight, but that's not going to ruin exactly what happens. That's not going to spoil anything, in my opinion. So with all of that being said, this game is available on Game Pass. If you have a Game Pass subscription, you can play this game entirely with no extra cost. But if you don't own Game Pass, and this isn't available on PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, or anything like that, it's an Xbox and PC game only. If you don't have Game Pass, you're playing on Steam, this game, or if you're playing on Xbox without the Game Pass subscription, this game's going to cost you around £46.50. It's about $50 or something like that. And for 6 hours of gameplay, I would like to stick to my guns from my previous video and say that I don't feel the game is worth it for that much money. In terms of its gameplay, how it works, the entertainment, the fact that the game does actually work from start to finish, I am going to recommend this game. I'm going to give it quite a high rating, but for its initial regular retail price, I am going to say is not worth paying the £46.50. If it was maybe £35 or something like that, I would say that's a lot more acceptable. It's a little bit expensive for what you get. So going off that, in terms of the gameplay, what you get in the package and everything like that, I am going to give this game an 8 out of 10. I thoroughly enjoyed it, the gameplay, the guns, the characters, the atmosphere, the environments, everything was done so well. There weren't a lot of bugs in the game. I mean, unless you're counting the intentional ones from the disclaimer and stuff. But there was nothing in there really that's going to completely ruin your experience, that's going to put you off playing. If you like this sort of a game where they break the fourth wall, you get spoken to directly by your guns, there's talking guns, there's aliens. If you like all that sort of stuff and you've got a good sense of humour, you enjoy comedy even if it is a little bit inappropriate, then this game is definitely for you. The reason I'm giving it an 8 and not anything higher is because I felt the game, like, I didn't want it to take itself too seriously. And throughout the middle portion, so if you split it up into 2 hours, 2 hours at the beginning, 2 hours in the middle, 2 hours at the end, the 2 hours in the middle is what kind of let it down for me. If it didn't go from being that comedy, light-hearted stuff at the start and then very drastically fall off and become too serious in the middle of the game, I probably would have given it a 9 or a 9.5. I can't give it a 10 because of the bug that I experienced with the boss break-in. There could be other issues in there for other players as well. I don't know if I ever will give a game a 10 again. It depends entirely on what actually happens with the game, but I would say an 8 is a reasonable rating. I enjoyed the comedy side of it, I enjoyed the gameplay and everything like that. I had no major problems with the game whatsoever. It's just how quick the comedy falls off and how serious it gets in a very short amount of time. Throughout the middle of the game, it wasn't as enjoyable as I feel it should have been or could have been. But yeah, that is my full-on review for High on Life. As I said, great game, 8 out of 10. Definitely worth playing. Wouldn't actually purchase it for full price. I'd wait for a little bit of a discount on it. But at the end of it, it is going to be a game that I recommend. I thoroughly enjoyed this one, and that is going to wrap up the review. Check out this video if you want to see other content on the channel. I will see you in the next one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.